if you would just kind of give us a background and an outline of just what was the German saucer project, as we understand it at this point.
The German saucer project was an offshoot of their advanced aviation and space research and development. Disbelieving at the beginning the existence of German saucers, I made a thorough search of books on advanced German aerospace technology, and what I discovered was astonishing. The Germans were the first to develop, seriously to develop the rocket engines, the turbojet engine, the pulse jet, the ramjet. They were the first to test a rocket-powered airplane in flight, a rocket-powered, a turbojet-powered, and a pulse jet-powered airplane. Piloted planes. They were the first one to introduce them in combat service. That's all what we know.
They also developed the flying wing.
They developed the flying wing, the Horten brothers. They developed a turbojet flying wing. They were working on monstrous intercontinental bombers of bizarre designs. I have several hundred slides that I've taken from books from the public domain of designs that was so ahead. The Germans developed, according to some even more advanced rumors, they developed the time machine. According to other rumors, the bombs that were thrown over Hiroshima and Nagasaki were German. The American project went along other lines, and the bombs that were produced were much bulkier and impossible to load on an airplane. A light-emitting rocket hit the moon in 1938, unmanned rocket. A light-emitting propulsion that I've never heard of, different from anti-gravity, different from rocket propulsion, probably very economic. Free energy, quite because you can't load car batteries to power the laser that would emit the light to take the rocket to the moon, obviously. In '52, German engineers built for Juan Perón a cold fusion electricity producing plant in Argentina.
Flying discs that were powered by conventional engines, basically.
By the engine, same engine that they used for the Messerschmitt 262 fighter.
Which would be a conventional engine, rather than an exotic.
No, conventional turbojet engine running on mundane, low-grade aviation kerosene.
There's a significant body of evidence out there that suggests that a significant number, if not all, UFOs come from right here on this planet, and we're going to look at that evidence. There's a book written by Renato Vesco, an Italian author who was in the military, Italian military, during World War II, and he had access to some very interesting files, German files, on German flying disc technology, that the Germans were developing flying discs along with other bizarre aircraft during World War II, and that's what we're going to be looking at, and what developed from that. And some of the UFOs we see today are the product of that technology?
Well, I would say through the research that I've done and the people that I've talked to, that the majority of what we see are actually built here on this planet. And maintained and flying on this planet. But it's really, you know, it's awful hard to believe, still even for me, that our government is keeping this from us. I mean, here we're touted as the greatest country in the world, and that we have so many freedoms here, and the freedom of speech reigns supreme over all of the world here in the United States, and yet it doesn't.
Right.
And yet it doesn't.
Well, you know, it goes back to the days of the Mercury flights and NASA, or the moon rockets and so forth. Our technology was the biggest, the bestest, the mostest. And you know, if this is a product for our technology, this is you know, an incredible stride for mankind and for this country. So you know, why aren't we talking about it? Why don't we wave our flag a little bit and say, hey, this is what we've created?
We've got Vladimir on the phone, and we'll be asking him some questions. Please feel free, if we have time, to call in. We'll try to get some right at the end. We're going to be talking to him about the German saucer. in the 30s and 40s. Jim had the opportunity to interview him while we were in Phoenix both times, wasn't it, Jim?
Yes.
The part that showed some of the pictures and stuff was last year, and then
Well, I've seen Vladimir 3 times. I saw him when he was here in May of '91 for the World Congress, and then he covered the same material again in the Congress in Phoenix last year, and then again this last month in Phoenix again.
and nobody's doing this. Roger, you knew him when you were living in Los Angeles, wasn't that true? Isn't that true?
Yeah, that's almost about 3.5 years ago. He's a very regular attender of a lot of UFO affairs over there. So he's a very difficult man to have in the audience. He asks some very pointed questions. He goes right to the heart of things.
I know he told me before we came on the air, he asked me to not talk about a certain subject, and we'll try to let that go. Are you on the phone? Vladimir?
Yeah.
Oh.
Very easy. I can answer your question with a counter question. I heard stories that Tesla developed a death ray, actually a dematerialization ray for the U.S. Army in the late 30s. You would point it to any object, a stone, a truck, a tank, a soldier, anything, and the thing would disappear. The ray would shift the target, the vibrations of the target, a little bit off time, basically and technically putting it in a different time continuum, making it disappear from our continuum. So anything that you pointed from here on to the horizon would disappear. I mean, whole armies would be annihilated in seconds. Why didn't the Americans use this thing to demolish the Germans much earlier? Obviously, I mean, no government uses its most advanced and secretive technology. They always try to keep it for a more special purpose. So, I mean, the V-1, the burst bomb, and the V-2 were fairly advanced rockets anyway. Nobody had them from the other side, so the Germans were using some of their advanced technologies. But the saucers, they were very well guarded, and the Germans were preparing a retreat to the South Pole, especially after '42, when the guys with the brains in Berlin realized that they would lose the war. Anybody who knew the real industrial might of England, Russia, and United States combined realized that, I mean, what proved at the end of the war that there were 500,000 Allied planes against 100,000 German planes produced. For every German plane in the air, there were 5 Allied planes. I mean, figures that are not very often discussed in the press. So knowing this, as early as probably 42, 43, the Germans started making tremendous effort to move hundreds of thousands of people to the South Pole colony and to keep the saucer's existence as secretive as possible. At the same time, Renato Vesco, this, well, he's considered the Italian Werner von Braun, the research and development boss of the Italian Air Force during the war, wrote in his book Intercept But Don't Shoot that there have been dozens of full fighter attacks and Kugelblitz attacks on Allied bomber formations with devastating results that have been documented by the Allied Air Forces. They did not reach the Allied press for obvious reasons. I mean,
Okay, Vladimir, what would you say is the best evidence, the most compelling evidence for the fact that the German saucer projects were a reality?
Funnily enough, the simplicity of obtaining anti-gravity. If anti-gravity is really obtained by simple spinning of any object along a vertical axis, as is the claim of 2 Japanese scientists from Tohoku University, Hayasaka and Takeuchi, who published a very important seminal paper in 1989 in the Physical Review Letters, one of the top 5 physics journals in the world. Simple spinning of a used airplane gyroscope would reduce its weight. It's official academic scientific literature. If it is that easy to produce anti-gravity, if one would not need the fancy science fiction hardware that Bob Lazar is revealing in his film, that our government has been secretly back engineering in Nevada test site by using a hand-me-down alien technology utilizing element 115. Maybe this is a legitimate anti-gravity drive and you can obtain anti-gravity even by this means, but normally anti-gravity is very easy to produce. If it is that easy, then you can couple every existing engine in your arsenal with spinning lenticular airframe and produce an anti-gravity craft, and the Germans did just that. They had piston engines with propellers spinning the craft around. They had Wankel engines with propellers. They had turbojets, pulse jets, ramjets, rocket engines in inboard and outboard variations, custom-made, standard aviation turbojets they were using on the Messerschmitt 262 plane, standard rocket engines they were using for the Messerschmitt 163 rocket plane. Rocket engines probably for the V2 were used for the rocket-propelled craft that could go in the outer atmosphere. The simplicity of anti-gravity. This is probably the biggest argument that the Germans really had these things. On top of that, we've probably discovered we have the largest collection of original newspaper articles from Germany from the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Okay, but then also the reports of bomber crews, Allied bomber crews, who witnessed Foo Fighters and similar disc-type craft approach as they would were in their bomb runs over Germany and France and so forth. The alleged Foo Fighters would be seen approaching the bombers from the ground. They would be coming up from German airspace rather than from above, correct?
I mean, they would be seen approaching them from everywhere because they would come from underground. They would from the ground surface level. They would be hanging on the air, waiting for the bombers to come, like glowing Christmas tree ornaments in the night skies of Germany. But they were so maneuverable, they could fast outpace. I mean, they were making probably 2-3 times the speed of sound in the atmosphere.
But how were those things powered, Vladimir? Because those things look much different than the pictures. You had an extensive array of saucer pictures with big German guns on them, like with tank turrets and a variety of stuff.
Yeah, much later generation of craft that didn't use any turbojet or rocket engines. These were spinning magnetic field craft powered by basically free gravitational energy. But the earlier models were powered with low-grade aviation-grade kerosene. And the turbojet craft were air breathers. They would use atmospheric air.
But what about, excuse me, but Vladimir, what about the Foo Fighters themselves? In other words, these glowing balls that...
Renato Vesco has about a chapter, maybe 20-30 pages of the whole construction of the Foo Fighters. They were spherical machines. They were basically unmanned anti-aircraft weapons platforms. They would raise vertically. Mm-hmm. They would be guided with television cameras. The first television cameras in military usage were utilized probably on these craft. They would have heat-seeking infrared capability. They would have acoustic target-seeking capability. They would have what else? Magnetic target-seeking capability. Radio controlled, remote controlled. They had turbines in the center of the craft. I'm not sure whether they carried the oxidizer on board or they were air breathing. I have a suspicion that the Kugelblitzes were non-air breathing, that they were carrying the oxidizer on board.
Vladimir.
Turbines. They were using turbojet turbines.
Mm-hmm. This with all of these Foo Fighters and German saucers during the war and the Allied shooting at them, you would have thought that they'd have shot one down in Austria or Yugoslavia or somewhere where somebody other than the Americans or the Russians or the Germans could get to it and either destroy it or take it. Or even reports of bomber pilots or fighter pilots coming back saying, have you run across anything like this?
Very good question. Actually, the Foo Fighters had some automatic circuitry, and their very design was made in such a way that if you would puncture the outer shell with a machine gun or a cannon burst, the gases that were, because it was a double-shelled construction, and the outer shell was a porous, sintered ceramic material, ceramic metallurgy, probably developed for the first time in Germany, and gases would be emitted from the whole outer skin porous surface. So if you make a large hole through a bullet entry, gases would escape through this hole even more vigorously, and the craft would automatically move away from whoever is shooting at it. I mean, they had this built-in automatic feature. Renato Vesco talks on pages upon pages of all these things. Even if they shot something down, by the time it falls and explodes and burns down, I mean, the debris would be so mangled, it would take quite a bit of a genius of an engineer to put it all together. What type of a device was it flying? I think that the Allies not only captured, they may have captured shot devices, I don't know. I have no record of such instances, but they definitely captured a vast treasure of information from the underground bases in Germany after the war ended. I mean, they had about 300 underground facilities, according to Renato Vesco, that were huge underground cities. One of them, the Mittelwerk complex next to the concentration camp Dora, was 2 kilometers long by 1 kilometer wide. We're talking about millions of square yards of floor space, shop space.
If the viewers want to find out more, is there anything written on here? I know that we're going to next week go ahead and profile your interview with Jim Nichols, as well as some of the photos that you showed during your lectures. But is there anything that is in print? Are you presently working on a book or anything that these people would be, our viewers would be able to pick up and?
I have a long list of videos that we have made. Half of them are on basically the German anti-gravity technology, the German colony on the South Pole, secret space flights by the superpowers to the moon, Mars, and beyond, according to the alternative 3 and other scenarios.
Let me ask you one last question here on my part. The Germans, with the technological development that they've done, there was certainly some involvement by Hitler in some very strange and unusual things. Do you believe that the Germans themselves had any type of connection with extraterrestrials or alien races during the early parts of their development programs?
Yeah, I've heard this story on numerous occasions. For example, I heard that there was a saucer crash near around Peenemünde, another saucer crash in the Bavarian Alps, which may have been used as an excuse by the German secret elite to peddle this flood of new technological information, this avalanche of information to trickle it down into German economy and industry without having to explain exactly where they got it from. But I do think that the Germans were heavily involved in, they had contact with extraterrestrials, several races probably, and the more time passes, the more I'm willing to accept the idea that basically extraterrestrials have always been in contact with the major terrestrial governments, and especially the secret societies, which are the fifth column for the introduction of a particular extraterrestrial philosophy in our society. The German secret societies like the Thule-Gesellschaft, the Vril Society, and numerous others that I don't even know, have all been in contact with different types of alien races. And from here comes this enmity and competition between terrestrial secret societies, which basically kind of support their extraterrestrial backers.
Let me ask one more little question here. You have an excellent selection of photos. Where in the world did you dig all those photos up?
Well, it said very simple in the Bible, search and you shall find. It's all in the public domain literature. One has to have the, how should I say, the belief that these things would be found, and they really come one by one. I mean, I'm waiting for information from Japan, information from Argentina, information from Russia, Czechoslovakia. People are coming out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
Specifically.
And anyone who calls
Hey.
me brings in a one new single photo, I simply download everything that I have.
Vladimir, now let's get specific about some of these. You have very good quality color photos of craft that are in the air and very advanced designs. Now, where did you find some of these?
A friend of mine, either he or some of his relatives shot a Kugelblitz in flight over Mount Rainier in the early 50s. He's living in Los Angeles. He was the owner of the negative of this photo, and he made me a copy.
Well, how
I bought
about
it from him. He sold that later to Bill Hamilton, and the photograph appeared on the back of his book, Top Secret.
Well, what about some of those that had the big cannon and the turrets?
These are black and white. I shot them with my camera off my TV screen, and they are coming from the German video documentary film called UFOs or the Third Reich Striking Back, which came through a friend of mine in Germany. He's a major New Age publisher and publicist in Germany. The film was originally produced by a secret German society, quite probably the Tourist Society. They never put their name under the film, but this is what the grapevine says.
Okay.
And the Tourist Society guys are kind of keepers of the flame. They preserve photographs, documentary material, and so on.
Vladimir, one of the things that I'm sure puzzles some of the audience is why wasn't Hitler pushing the use of this kind of technology with a greater extent? I mean, was this kind of technology being kind of hidden from Hitler by his own people?
Well, it's a good question and quite a complicated question. But I've heard stories that, for example, Hitler had a rule: never introduce in warfare a weapon that they didn't have developed the anti-weapon. They introduce the turbojet fighters and bombers only after they have introduced the anti-aircraft heat-seeking missiles in place. I've heard stories that actually the two nuclear bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were German construction. That by the end of the war, the Germans were working on an antimatter bomb, time machine, and many other bizarre advanced technologies, death ray, and so on, free energy. But the antimatter bombs were as big as a pineapple and strong enough to devastate the whole of New York or London, which could not be done with a small Hiroshima-sized bombs.
Right, but the question is...
So Hitler opposed the use of these nuclear bombs over England or the United States on a very racial reason. He said, we are not in the business of killing Aryans. This was the same reason he told his general staff when he opposed the German army rolling over the escaping British and French soldiers at Dunkirk in, I think, 40 or 41, when they were defeated, and Hitler stopped his armies, allowing the Allied fleet to evacuate these defeated soldiers in England and basically use them for the D-Day invasion again.
Okay, but after the war, or as the war was winding down, it was obvious that the Germans were defeated. Wasn't there a secret cadre of his own Nazi SS that took this technology and took it out of the country before it could be captured by the Allies?
Oh, yeah. I think from 42, 43, the smart guys in Germany had made their own plans that they are about to lose the war, so why don't we just let's work on some escape scenario. So every new technology was tested quietly, low-key, low profile. For example, they tested a greenish-looking radiation, a death ray in Romania, then they packed and crated and shipped everything to the South Pole. They would test it, make sure that it worked, and they would never try it again, and they would move it to the South Pole. So when Admiral Byrd arrived with a huge three-aircraft carrier, it's a triple armada descending on the South Pole from three directions, they were beaten in 2 weeks and hastily retreated. I mean, probably the Germans had at least one smart move by not using these weapons in 44, 45 on the European theater, but concentrating everything they had in the South Pole theater.
Okay, now if such a technology, if such a renegade Nazi force escaped to South America or Antarctica and has been there all this time, unassailed by any of the Allies or Soviets, that's really pushing credibility to believe that such a group could still exist down there. What
Yeah,
kind of
actually,
evidence
the
is
rumor
there?
goes that there is a large city called the New Berlin.
And why haven't they tried to complete the goals of the Third Reich in the years since then?
Well, not that they have tried, they have completed them. They have produced a master race on the South Pole, according to the rumor. They have genetically engineered and re-engineered themselves to the point where they live quite a bit longer. They have fewer diseases. They are probably able to, not probably, but they developed genetic engineering to such a perfection that, I mean, the Germans had hybrids between humans and animals 50 years ago in the concentration camps, so where are they now after 50 years? But this is a research that goes on hand in hand with the other superpower governments. My feeling and suspicion is that the tall, blonde, Nordic-looking guys that we see so often in the little grey abduction scenarios, they are in Bud Hopkins' books, they are in the UFO documentary UFOs Are Real, the Travis Walton abduction from Snowflake, Arizona, where he confronted a tall, blonde Nordic guy in the big mothership, or possibly a German South Polar colony. These are the tall blondes, in my opinion. I mean, quite probably these are the Germans from the South Pole doing genetic experiments hand in hand with the Russians and Americans under the guidance and tutelage of many extraterrestrial races and the overseeing celestial management centers and power structures that run the whole show. Thank you very much for all the interest and for all the information, and we'll be talking again.
Okay, buddy. Thanks.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Thanks for
Okay.
that.
Interesting stuff.
He's a heavyweight.
I know from the outside it would probably, if you haven't seen some of his material or seen some of the tape, you'd just step back and you'd,
Well, this is
you know, we have a tape that we're going to be running. In fact, I cut in on some of the segments in the beginning of the actual footage that he has and documentation of these crafts, and it's just really amazing. You would never think it the way that, you know, we thought we won the war, and we did, and yet we're still poo-hooing these flying saucers.
Well, you look at the fact that from what he's got, the pictures that he's got, and these are really phenomenal pictures. It demonstrates that if that technology existed at that point in time, and I'm not questioning that, that's not an issue, but seeing this stuff in the air and seeing what it is, there's been 50 years to play with that, and it means that they've had a 50-year lead like that.
Well, you know, it isn't so much that. Jim made a question, asked him a question, how come that if there was such an elite group of Nazis that got to leave,
right.
you know, but if you look at the whole scenario, and even kind of Shane talked about a little bit on his show, the Illuminatis and the secret government that actually are the bankers that are running this, if they're running and funding a black operation like this to begin with, you know, they're going to take their piggy bank and move it. Mm-hmm. And they have the money to do it, and they have the ways, and if both continents are involved in something like that, they're going to allow that to happen. You know, the Americans came in and they moved all those, they created everything up and moved it up to Canada and then sent it back down to White Sands, and the Russians did the same thing with their group of people. So it isn't, you know, it really isn't that secret when you get down and see this kind of thing. Okay, but again, I'm gonna play devil's advocate a little bit here. If the Germans had this, and there was an elite type of a group, I mean, we saw all of the other stuff that they used. They even used it against the Brits, and some of the submarines were the most advanced submarines at their time. Why haven't we seen it since this has been going on since the 30s and 40s, why hasn't the public been aware of this? Why hasn't the public seen a flying saucer as much as they would like to say they have? One of you guys want to grab
I
that?
think we've seen plenty of flying saucers. There's no question that we've seen exceptional numbers of craft here in the United States. We haven't recently seen a lot of craft, but during the 40s, late 40s, early 50s,
Early 50s a lot.
there was a tremendous amount. Then we had flaps in the 60s and we had them in the 70s. It seems that even this year there seems to be a very high number of sightings. We're getting some locally here, some things are being seen in the air. There's more scuttlebutt from other places than the United States. And I think the only thing that's happening is that with the way the different UFO groups are set up, there isn't really that kind of central focus where sightings are being collated and the information got back out to the public, so we're seeing it, so we're knowing what's going on. And I think that there's a number of the craft that are out there now have cloaking capability, and generally we don't see them operating during the day. So that's another factor. It comes down to now whether the craft that are operating are, in other words, from here or from somewhere else. That's really a very difficult question to answer right now.
Well, Tesla kind of had his finger on the pulse of things back in the 30s and just kind of backed off. I've heard Vladimir use the same thing, and that machine that he was talking about, that death ray, he did have it for the government, and they loaded it on a train, and they even blew part of a mountain up, and the government just wouldn't use it.
You know, the other thing, too, is besides technology like that, we're seeing an awful lot of people who are having encounters. Now, who they're having encounters with, what these individuals are, we know they look a lot different than us. And it appears that, in other words, there is a program going on, and they're not really interested in us seeing craft or objects in the air. They're much, whoever or whatever's carrying out this agenda is much more concerned about keeping things quiet.
You have to realize that with the communications that we have nowadays and the sophistication that we have in radar and being able to put satellites and going to the moon, that each government, or anyway the superpowers, knows what the hell's going on. They know that if there's something down in Antarctica, they know what's down there. There's no hiding that. They know what's going on.
But they're just not telling us.
Well, that's what I'm getting about. I think it becomes more of a secret government. The more and more I get involved in this, the more and more I talk to people that'll come up to me and say, Ted, I was a radar man 20 years ago, and I was in North Dakota, and we scrambled jets over UFOs, and all of a sudden we were told from higher levels to erase everything. We haven't seen it, and just erase it. Just take it off like it wasn't even there. And he was telling me that when they do this type of thing, they have to go to 3 levels or 4 levels. So once it got to the 4th level, then it had to go back down and erase everything.
So somebody at a very high level knows what's going on.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So Vladimir, welcome, and I'm very glad that you managed to make it.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
Now, Vladimir, I've looked at your credits and I'm terribly impressed. In fact, looking at what you've done in terms of education, I'm really surprised. Here you have a Bachelor of Science in Physics, you have a Master of Science in Electronics, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. You have brought on to me an awful lot of information about about Nazi Germany and the technology that they had in the 40s. Now, I am absolutely astounded by the information that you have to share with us. You have brought on pictures. Could you please tell us about these pictures and what they actually are telling us?
Well, in one sentence, while researching UFOs in general and the terrestrial component of the alien presence in particular, namely secret terrestrial programs that have been dealing with anti-gravity and secret space programs for the last almost 100 years, I realized that a lot of these secret projects are
covered up behind the alien smokescreen, and later on laundered to the general public as an alien technology gift to us. And in order to pull the carpet from under the feet of the government, or let's call it the party line American ufology, I've been doing research on Nazi UFOs, on the 50 or more basically different models of craft that the Germans built before and during the Second World War, powered by every engine that was in production in Germany at that time, by piston engines, Wankel engines, turbojet engines, ramjet, pulse jets, rocket engines, and the final and most advanced models were powered by electromagnetogravitic drives. These are the most, basically no moving part drives. But in order to convince someone that this massive research and development conspiracy, let's call it, and this secret space program run by the Germans has been on for all these years, actually the persistent rumors are that the Germans landed on the moon and Mars before the war ended. And later they were followed by many other secret programs that we will talk about probably in a future show. The Russians and the Americans landed on the moon and Mars in the late 40s and early 50s respectively. An Italian team landed on Mars in 56. Many superpowers have been actively pursuing secret space programs based on anti-gravity propulsion. But in order to convince someone of the existence of this massive research and development conspiracy, one first has to be convinced of the existence of political and economic conspiracies in this world.
You talk about Germany already. Does this actually mention that Germany, before the Second World War, being involved in very, very advanced technology?
Yes, actually these books mention a lot of extremely bizarre, almost science fiction military technologies. And the first book that mentions particularly the first several models of flying saucers that were built in Germany is the book Intercept UFO, Intercept But Don't Shoot, by Renato Vesco.
Now, Renato Vesco, was he part of the Mussolini government?
Renato Vesco was actually a very leading figure in the Italian research and development effort. He was the research and development boss of the Italian Air Force. He may not have been a Werner von Braun, but he definitely was an extremely brilliant scientist and engineer. And besides that, Italians and Japanese were regularly briefed on all secret German developments during the war. So after the war, when he wrote the book, he knew exactly what he was writing about. Actually, he wrote and discussed in great detail the first several models of flying saucers that were built in Germany. This is the turbojet-powered flying saucer built by Schriever, diameter of about 30 feet, and the joint project. This was the first operational interceptor fighter saucer that was built by Bellonzo, Miete, and Schriever. I have some photographs that were extremely rare to find. Many of these were pulled out of German libraries by our research associates and friends. Most of them are impossible to find in the United States. The third model that we talked about is a very interesting photograph done in 1952 over Mount Rainier in Washington State, and in my opinion this is a flying Kugelblitz or ball lightning automatic anti-aircraft weapons platform that was captured by the Americans and test flown secretly from bases in the western United States and northwestern Canada. Later on, through German sources, we have discovered not only turbojet-powered craft, but these are rocket-powered craft with rocket engines of the V2 type. And the subsequent model of Miete, these two craft had an exoatmospheric capability and they could easily go in orbit around the Earth. This is a very interesting drawing of a saucer-type dreadnought, a 60-yard diameter, this is about 200 feet diameter, interplanetary craft that has huge sleeping compartments. It is basically 10 stories tall. Drawings were published in Germany by a little secret society there.
What would have been the purpose of that Schriever flying disc here?
It had definitely an interplanetary objective, because a flying saucer that can circle the Earth in 1.5 hours does not need sleeping compartments. You don't have to sleep between during your flight. But basically, the longest distance you can travel around the planet is 1-2 hours at the most.
Right.
So obviously, sleeping compartments on such a massive scale would be needed only for a craft that would land on the moon, that would stay there for a long time and come back.
So you're actually saying that the Germans pre-World War II were refining the technology in order to actually travel to a different planet?
Exactly. These two models are capable of going in orbit around the Earth and probably going in an extended elliptical orbit toward the moon. This huge craft is capable of getting into orbit around the moon and landing on the planet. And these were actually the most primitive of the models that the Germans built. 2 months ago, I received through some private channels a secret documentary film made by the German secret society, the Gesellschaft, something like an equivalent of the Illuminati society here. The title of this documentary, 2-hour documentary film, is UFOs, the Third Reich Strikes Back. This is the emblem of this secret society. They were basically the ideologues of the Third Reich. But once these things invented, they were shared later by the superpowers. They cannot be disinvented, to use Daniel Bell's interesting
One thought
expression.
keeps coming back to me, and that is almost world supremacy. I'm looking at this and I'm going, what's the incentive? What's the reasoning behind trying to refine such technology?
Well, it gives man an ability to go to the moon, to explore the planets in the solar system, to go beyond the solar system. Some of these larger crafts were definitely able to go beyond the solar system, as we shall see very soon. The first row of photographs, actually this is a very small part, this is maybe a third of all the documentary photographs shown in the German documentary video. These are interceptor fighter craft of the Vril series that have never been written about in any other source in the world literature so far. They were about 30 feet in diameter and extremely maneuverable. Their speed was almost 3 times the speed of sound. For them, Allied bombers and fighters were basically sitting ducks. Renato Vesco in his book depicts about 3 dozen attacks of flying saucers on Allied bomber formations with devastating consequences, and these all were attacks of the previous and more primitive craft. These craft were developed in the very last years of the war, 44, 45. This subsequent line here are the 25-meter diameter, which is about 75-meter diameter, 30 feet tall tank killers. The craft of the Honeybull type. We have never seen before UFOs with tank turrets attached underneath. We see different models of tank turrets. Actually, these are standard issue turrets for the German Panther tank and the Panzer IV tank. Later models developed in the 60s from the German colony on the South Pole, which is another very controversial issue. Admiral Byrd led an expedition to the South Pole in 47, trying to wipe out the Germans, but he was beaten very badly. In just 2.5 weeks he had to leave the continent because the Germans had perfected all these craft. On the bottom row we have the most interesting examples here. This is an original drawing of a cigar-shaped mothership of 330 feet length that was carrying inside itself one of the tank killer craft and 3 of the interceptor fighter saucers.
So how big was this cigar-shaped
It was about 90 to 100 feet in diameter and 330, 350 feet length. This is a football field size craft. The most interesting, and this could be photographs of German crafts in flight well after the end of the World War, probably flown from their base on the South Pole.
In what year was that, approximately?
These photographs were taken 42, these are and 43, these are 44 and 45. These are taken after the war. The drawings date from 1943. The biggest craft that the Germans built was the 74-meter diameter, this is about 220 feet diameter, flying saucer of the Honeybull 3 type. This is a naval warfare craft with, we can see here in these turrets, triple guns of a naval caliber, 3 turrets on the underbelly and a 4th turret on the top. This was a craft made for huge naval warfare. According to this film, the only craft was taken and flown from the Earth to Mars by a huge crew of basically volunteers and self-sacrificial crew of Germans and Japanese, and it landed on January 15, 1946. After 8 months of flight, they departed April 45, a month before the war ended in Germany, and they crash landed on Mars. The gravity field there is too weak, so the craft couldn't make it real nice in the landing. The most interesting things about this craft are that these are free energy devices. These are basically flying converters of gravitational energy that convert the energy of the geomagnetic field of Earth into the electromagnetic energy of flight. So these craft never had to tank. They never had to replenish their reservoirs. They had actually tapped into the inexhaustible reservoir of free gravitational energy of the planet. This is something even more taboo as a topic than the fact that the Germans developed all these 50 different models of craft. Because if one is able to go basically for free to the moon and Mars without using a single gram of fuel, free riding on the gravitational currents of our solar system, then a lot of our present-day economy about, well, we all have to pay for the fuel when we tank our cars, becomes obsolete.
So let's discuss this in much more depth. In your estimation, where is all this technology stored?
Well, Germans were not the first one to develop this technology. John Keely presented his anti-gravity flying bathtub, as if we may call it like this, a funny looking contraption. He sat on it, rose noiselessly, accelerated to a very fast speed and came back and landed in front of the stunned eyes of the War Ministry here in the United States in the 1860s. They said, well, we can't find any possible use of this device.
Where was Nazi Germany, I mean, when did Nazi Germany actually come into play?
There are persistent rumors that the Germans were contacted by one extraterrestrial race, as have been all governments of all superpowers all throughout the terrestrial history. But that particular race was the cause of this tremendous explosion, this cornucopia of German killing machines and advanced weapons technologies that had absolutely no precursor whatsoever in previous terrestrial developments. So basically from the 20s and 30s, Germany was actively pursuing research in rocket propulsion, in anti-gravity propulsion, in free energy devices that were later combined with their flying saucers to make these formidable weapons. Later on, this technology was used by the secret powers, by Russians, by the superpowers, namely the Russians, the British, the Americans, the French. Even the rumors are that the Israelis and the Brazilians have their own anti-gravity craft in operation these days.
I have a question that's burning me. That question is, why didn't the Germans at the time when they were actually losing the war, why did they not actually throw all the technology that they had, such as this, and just as much as possible obliterate the enemy?
Well, actually, we are getting here very deep into the political and banking conspiracies behind these wars. A war is not meant to obliterate the enemy. A war is meant to load the credit card of the government by forcing it to buy more armaments. If you obliterate the enemy, there wouldn't be any future enemy for the future war that is coming. So basically, all these wars have been orchestrated and choreographed by the same world banking elite that has been funding both sides in a conflict.
But in what way would that benefit Nazi Germany?
Well, actually, from the mid-30s, the Germans were actively involved in their South Polar research. From the late 30s, they started building their underground bases on the South Pole, and by 45, they have moved, according to some rumors, from few 100,000 to up to 1 million of slave labor and Nazi scientists and SS officers down there in this huge underground colony that later on engaged in space exploration and genetic research. According to persistent rumors, basically all the genetic research going on in the underground labs these days in the United States has been started in Nazi Germany. I know a very good movie producer who was working on one UFO documentary, and he saw in a military base here in the United States a documentary film, 30-minute film about genetic research on humans, crossbreedings between humans and animals in Nazi Germany 50 years ago in the concentration camps. So the South Polar colony had primarily its goals in space exploration and genetic research. So basically the Germans were saving all these devices for the defense of the South Polar colony, which Admiral Byrd learned unexpectedly that they had made an impenetrable fortress there.
So why did we not find out about what happened to Admiral Byrd?
Well, there's an interesting interview in an Argentinian paper. He probably gave that on his way back from the South Pole before the security lid was clamped on him, where he said the next World War would be fought with an extremely powerful adversary that has the ability to fly from pole to pole. He was obviously talking about the German craft that obliterated his aviation. All his planes were shot down in less than 3 weeks. He came down with 3 carrier fleets with 3 formations of carriers and support craft and 4,000 troops, and was beaten in less than 3 weeks and hastily retreated from
After the Second World War, Nazi Germany, obviously after its defeat, was there a tacit agreement that they could keep that technology and refine it further? I'm surprised that...
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we have to keep in mind that the Rothschilds and all the other European bankers have been financing for 300 years both sides in every conflict. And this is the best way for them to have the government load their credit cards and so then to live off these enormous interest on these loans. During the Second World War, Nazi Germany was financed by basically the Wall Street and the American banking community and European banking community, as was the Russian Bolshevik Revolution.
Are you saying that German bankers, namely some of the big families, were behind the revolution in Russia?
Well, the Russian Revolution was financed by Wall Street, by the Vatican, and by South African gold. It was financed, it was planned, financed, paid for, carried, and later on Wall Street helped Russia in the first 20 years of the most difficult 20th, basically in the 20s and 30s, by propping up the Russian economy. So what happened to the German South Polar colony? I think that Admiral Byrd probably concluded the first tacit agreement or condominium agreement between the Americans and the Germans, namely that let's not interfere into each other's affairs. Maybe even we would do some trading. We would be trading with crude materials, raw materials, bolts, nuts, metal profiles, raw materials, and you would be giving us some of your astonishing technology. This is according to NACHTWAFFE in his book Intercept But Don't Shoot, and according to the book of Genesis.
These are fictionalized.
The second, yes, but this is a documentary, highly engineering, highly specialized report on the German anti-gravity research and development. I have a lot of information about secret collusion between the United States and Russia, all behind the smoke screen of the Cold War.
But Germany, what's Germany's involvement in the Cold War?
Official West Germany, very little. Basically, they were the strongest member of NATO. But the secret German colony on the South Pole was basically working hand in hand with the secret Soviet-American space program. It is rumored that when the Russians and Americans landed on a joint flight to the moon with a probably American-made saucer in the late 40s, not only that they discovered the German swastika flags already planted in the most famous craters on the moon, but they spent a few days as guests to the German ex-Nazi moon base.
You have so much information, it's staggering. In fact, I'm absolutely overwhelmed by all the information that you've managed to share with us in such short time. And I would like to be able to invite you for further shows where we can go much deeper into how all this Nazi German involvement came about and where it's really taking us to ultimately.